Sweet Dreams is the 24th and final episode of the 5th season of Frasier. This is directed by Sheldon Epps, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a really good episode. I think it raises some really interesting points about principle, and it's quite an ending to the 5th season as well, and of course I'll talk about the ending when we get there. It starts off down at KCL, and Bulldog and Gil are doing an ad together on air, and then Daphne comes down to collect Frasier because his car is in the shop, and she happens to mention that there are traffic problems because of a bookstore rally. This bookstore is supposed to be closing down, so people are rallying against it. Frasier mentions the bookstore where Mark Twain once gave a reading, so he, despite Daphne not being enthusiastic, he wants to go and join the rally, and he does. And we're there for, I want to say, maybe a minute, and Frasier's having a good time. He's rallying for the bookstore. People recognise him. He gives a very brief speech. And then the police arrive and threaten to start arresting people. And everybody else is still chanting. They're still behind this rally. Frasier starts to panic. And he leaves to get reinforcements just as Daphne is getting arrested. And we cut to the apartment. He's with Niles. He explains that Martin has gone down to the station to bail her out. And he seems more concerned about the fact that he's not as courageous as he used to be. Less concerned about Daphne being arrested. He feels guilty. He feels bad. But it seems to be more about his own feelings. And he's then down at KCL and he kind of sits on this thought. We meet the new station manager, Kenny Daly, played by Tom McGowan. And he's a really brilliant character. And he wants Frasier to read an advert about tea that can give people happy dreams. And Frasier realises that he can't do this. And I have to say, I respect that. He says, and I quote, "If I as a doctor read it, it sounds like medical advice." And obviously this tea has no scientific basis for giving people happy dreams. It's not a strong claim. And Kenny basically tells him, "You read this or I'm going to have to fire you." Not because Kenny wants to do that, but because the powers who control Kenny are making sure that that would be the case. And when he says that, Ross says, 10 seconds, Frasier, and it's pretty intense. And I have to say, I love how this played out, because Frasier did have courage, and he did have the courage to stick to his principles, as he starts to say on air that he is not a man who is going to throw aside his principles. And we learned quite quickly that actually Ross had put on the best of Frasier Crane. Frasier got as far as saying, "I am not a man." And then they cut it there. So pretty entertaining. And well, Frasier is fired. And he feels great. Not about being fired, but about staying true to his principles, which I think is a really great point to make. He even feels so confident. He stares Eddie when Eddie wants to give him a staring contest. He stares out Eddie and Eddie runs. And then Martin finds out about this, and Martin doesn't see the problem. And I have to say, I'm completely on Frasier's side here. I don't think he should have done the advert if it was against his principles. And then, surprisingly, Kenny arrives. And Kenny hasn't been able to eat or sleep since he fired Frasier, and then we established it was about an hour and a half ago. And he says he'll sort it. And the next thing we see is down at KCL. It's a very quick episode. We're almost at the end, actually. Not a lot happens. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily. It just feels very, very quick. And we're down at KCL, and the image in the background behind Frasier is heartbreaking as Frasier is on air, and we see Kenny leaving with his box of stuff. Kenny has been fired. And Frasier thinks that this is completely unacceptable. So he gathers loads of other people at KCL and they go to fight for Kenny's job. And he gives this speech, very well written speech, very well delivered. And everybody is fired. There's not going to be any more talk radio on KCL. It's just going to be music. And that's how we end things, with Frasier dressed very casually, leaving with his box of stuff. And that's a pretty powerful way to end season 5. And I remember, I don't remember a lot of how I responded to Frasier the first time I watched it, but I remember very vividly watching this and genuinely having no idea what season 6 would be like. Would he get his job back? Would it be a new venture for Frasier? Is this the end of KCL? Is there a way they can resolve this? Obviously, I've seen the show before, so I now know what happens next. But I remember, and as I said, it's very rare that I remember how I felt with a first viewing, but I remember being concerned, excited to find out what was next. It's a very, very powerful way to end the season. And even though I know what happens next, I can't remember every specific detail, but I can remember the general gist of what happens next. But even though I remember, I cannot wait to watch the next episode. Sweet Dreams is a really brilliant episode, really great look at the importance of principles and sticking up for them, and definitely a solid way to end a pretty brilliant 5th season of Frasier.